Hey, how you doing? And welcome back to another video on the channel. So it's nearly here. FPL starts tomorrow, and if you're new to the channel, what I do every week is a preview video discussing team selection, captaincy options, and transfer thoughts for the following game week that's coming up. What I'll also normally do is a review video of how my team did in the previous game week, and then my thoughts around that. What I will also do is a mini league review. So if you're top of the mini league or you've had, top of the monthly rankings, I'll give you a shout out here in this video. So pause the video now, go join the mini league if you're a fan of the channel and what I've been doing with data and everything. It'd be great to have you in the mini league. And likewise, if you're not a fan of my team selection, you want to try and take me on and see if you can beat me, then you're more than welcome as well. It'd be great to have as many people as possible. So pause the video, go join the mini league, and then we can crack on. So the first thing we're going to look at is the fixtures for this week, and it's a new season, so it's always going to be interesting. And a Friday night start is always a little bit extra, and Liverpool at home to Bournemouth is a really interesting fixture from a captaincy point of view because Mo Salah is head and shoulders above everyone else for predicted points for this game week. And whilst he is a great captaincy option and probably who I'm going to captain, I'm never a massive fan of captaining someone on the first game of a game week because I think if they blank, you've got the rest of the game week you've kind of got to live through. And, whilst everyone else's captains are playing, it's just, you just puts you on the back foot of a game week. However, with a lot of people captaining Mo Salah, if he does do well and you don't captain him, then you could be behind for the rest of this game week as well. There's not usually a great captaincy option in the first game of a game week, typically. Now, if you're not captaining Salah or you don't even own Salah, there are some good options as well, and one of which is Palmer, home to Crystal Palace. Now, I'm assuming if you don't have Salah and you don't have Haaland, you'll definitely have Palmer. So the top three most points predicted players, you will probably own one of them, at least, I would have thought. I think any of those three are good options. I actually probably would go Haaland above Palmer if you owned Haaland, of course. And I definitely would go those three above Saka and Watkins. Saka away at Man United and Watkins at home to Newcastle. I can see both of those games just being 1-1. Quite cagey affairs. Nobody wants to lose the first game of the season. There's not really a clear team who better than the other one at the moment, or at least we don't know. You would expect Arsenal to beat Man United, but crazy things happen, right? When we predict our scores for a game week or how our teams are going to do, we don't get it 100% right. So there are going to be results this week that we don't expect, and then we'll adapt. So if you own Salah, I would captain him. And if you don't own Salah, I think Haaland is probably the next best captain away at Man City. And then Palmer would be third choice. So onto my team, and I have made a couple of changes, and none in goal really. Jordan Pickford is the player for me, and thank you to everyone who commented on my team selection video where I've gone into this a bit more in depth earlier in the week. It was great to have different people's opinions, and a lot of you were kind of concerned about the defense in my team. So we'll discuss that a bit further and just my updated thoughts, but. For Jordan Pickford, he's kept the second most clean sheets last season. He got 12, and he got 13 clean sheets the year before. He also made the most saves last year, and he got the most bonus points among keepers. So I think for me, he is just an obvious pick. I know I could save money by downgrading, but I had David Raya in goal all last season at 5.5 million, and it worked out fine. I didn't really feel like I was short of money elsewhere. His fixtures look good. I know a lot of people are going for Robert Sanchez from Chelsea, and I just don't see it. Like, I think it's one of those ones where a few people, sort of, popular content creators, they will sort of say that they're looking at Robert Sanchez, and it kind of just gains momentum. I don't see he's that much better than a Matt Sells or a Dean Henderson, say, at the same price. For me, mainly, I don't want to take up a Chelsea slot in goal. I think the difference between the goalkeepers is probably quite minimal. And whereas the difference between having a Chelsea outfield player could be massive, so I've got Cucurella in my team, and I think the difference between having, say, Robert Sanchez and someone else in defence compared to Pickford and Cucurella, I would much rather have that Pickford Cucurella combination, and it actually saves me money by going for Pickford from Everton, and then I'm not going for Tarkowski from Everton. I go for a different, cheaper defender, and that combination works for me as well. So Pickford is going to be in goal unless I don't know there's an injury or I have a sudden change of heart, because ultimately you can, whilst you don't want to use a free transfer on him, you can use a wild card later down the line if it does get a little bit tight for money. But in the meantime, I like the fixtures. I think Everton's fixtures are really sort of being, sort of slept on a little bit. So in defence, it's pretty interesting, really. I have made a change. Have gone for Joachim Anderson from Fulham instead of Totti Gomez. And like I said just before, a lot of people were concerned about my defence. I think it's where you can save money this season, and I just don't get the Spurs defense. A lot of people are really, keen on Spurs, and yesterday they had the European Super Cup final where you can have confirmation bias either way, right? So Romero and Van der Ven scored. Pedro Porro got an assist. And if you had Spurs defense in your team already, you'll be like, see, told you they're great. Whereas I would sort of say, well, they're not going to score every game. They're not going to have their centre back scoring every game. Pedro Porro is a concern for me in the sense that I don't have him and he could be, a good player in FPL this season on set pieces. I think a lot of the Spurs' emphasis is done because they play Burnley at home in Game Week 1. And after that, I look at the fixtures and I think they're probably not going to keep that many clean sheets. They are a team in transition. I think they will do better than last season, but I would have to kind of restructure my defense quite a lot. And I would have to sort of sell players in order to upgrade for Pedro Porro, even with the 500,000 in the bank. I know people will say, "Well, just sell Pickford to 5 million goalkeeper, and then use that million you've got to upgrade one of your 4.5s to Pedro Porro." And you know what? Could do that. I'm not going to lie and say that's not tempting. I just I just think Spurs are being a little bit overhyped in defence. Anyway, with Joachim Anderson, I took out Totti Gomez, and he is someone that I think, Fulham had, whilst they only got 4 clean sheets last year, Fulham were the fifth best in the league at expected goals conceded. And Anderson ranked 10th in defensive contributions out of all defenders. So he is a solid player. And even if Fulham aren't getting clean sheets, he's someone that I think could have an upturn in points per game this season. But I think for Fulham to, have a good expected goals conceded, a lot of teams they will get closer to their average across the season. Fulham were underperforming in that metric, and it's a bit like Chris Wood overperforming in goals scored. It's likely that it just kind of reverts to the mean a little bit in a new season. I also don't get like Van Dijk. I feel like a lot of people are going for Van Dijk, and I look at Van Dijk compared to Cucurella, and I think Cucurella is such an obvious pick, and I think people aren't going for it because they've got Sanchez in goal and they don't want a double Chelsea defence. I think Cucurella is so much more appealing than a Van Dijk, and again, prepared to be wrong on that, but I just think he's head and shoulders the best 6 million defender right now with Chelsea's fixtures. And I guess you could say the same for Nottingham Forest defenders as well. I'm just not sold on Nottingham Forest. I think they're going to struggle a lot more this season, and I see Neco Williams in a lot of people's teams. And at 5 million, I just think, could you not like downgrade to a 4.5 or upgrade to a 5.5 or a 6 million from that price point? I think, he's the least likely to start in Nottingham Forest defence. And he's also someone who I think is going to be, you know, just overrated. I just don't see how he's going to get all his attacking returns that people are saying. And Nottingham Forest, whilst they've got good fixtures, I just think the clean sheets won't necessarily be there as much as they were last season. I think if you're going for a Forest defender, find an extra point 0.5 million and go for a Murillo. Say, I think he's so much of a better option for Nottingham Forest than Neco Williams. So into midfield, and there's no changes here. I'm going to talk about Semenyo a little bit because compared to other midfielders, I think at 7 million with their fixtures, he looks great. And it's a bit like people getting in Spurs for Burnley at home. I think people aren't getting in Bournemouth because of Liverpool away in the first game week. But once that game week's out of the way, and it's one that Semenyo could score in, right? He could still score points. I think Bournemouth have some great fixtures. People will say, well, they've sold all the defence, but they've done that before. A year ago they didn't have Dean Huyson, who they bought in cheap and he sold for much more profit. And there's the same for other defenders as well. They do replace players. They have a good scouting thing, and that's a bit like Brighton, right? They're getting players nobody's heard of. Everyone thinks they're rubbish. They do well, and then everyone signs them. So I don't see why that wouldn't be the case for Bournemouth again. And people expect Liverpool to win that first game of the season. I always think, well, we could be wrong, and they might not win, and therefore Bournemouth all of a sudden look great options. I think I don't really like the chances of midfielders' defensive actions needing 12 per game rather than 10 for a defender. I think it's going to be harder for midfielders to get than it is for defenders. So when you're looking at your midfield, of course, Anderson from Nottingham Forest is a good pick. So is Caicedo, and I also like Lewis Cook, even though he's suspended for Bournemouth in the first game. I think for the rest of the season, he's also someone who gets quite a lot of defensive actions. I think they're going to hit them a lot less consistently than defenders will. I also see Ndai and Dewsbury Hall from Everton in a lot of people's midfields. And I just don't see why you would go all in on Everton. There's nothing really that's showing Everton attack will score a lot of goals. David Moyes' teams typically don't score a lot of goals. They're a lot more solid, a lot more sort of structured, and they don't go in all out attack. And Everton don't score a lot of goals per game. I know it was under a different manager, but last year again under Sean Dyche, they scored a crazy low amount of goals. They went for like a massive streak of games without scoring. So people sort of saying, getting in Dye and Dewsbury Hall from Everton, I just think why are we all of a sudden really high on the Everton attack? I just think there's better options from other teams. So up front, we've got no changes again. I do just want to talk about Jimenez a little bit because I've got two Fulham players in my squad now. I feel like people aren't talking about Fulham and Brighton as teams, and they're both good teams. Brighton finished eighth last year. Fulham are likely to finish in and around the top 10 of the league. And I think they're both just solid players. Now, Welbeck is someone who I think could get sold before the deadline tomorrow. And I see a lot of Fulkrug in people's teams from West Ham. And again, he's a good player, but he was injured a lot last season. West Ham were not good last season, or at least weren't scoring a ton of goals. They relied on Jared Bowen really heavily. And I think what's made us think that all of a sudden Fulkrug is a good option. So I would just be aware of sort of the potential risks of getting in sort of these popular players. I think sometimes we can bandwagon on these players. I think I look at these three strikes and think, well, they're just as good as Fulkrug from West Ham. A little bit more expensive, but you know, not the end of the world. Now, Fulham's fixtures don't look super easy. I think Jimenez is someone who can do well. I know there's a risk, and people mentioned it in the comments of the last video, where all these players might get taken off early. I think Strand Larsen's good for 90 minutes, but I can totally see Jimenez and Welbeck getting taken off after 60, 70 minutes. And that's not ideal, and it's something I am aware of. I could upgrade Welbeck to Evan Nielsen and go with double Bournemouth attack. That seems a little risky. Like I could swap Semenyo to Sarr, Welbeck to Evan Nielsen, and go with sort of double Crystal Palace and then a Bournemouth attacker. As I get closer to the deadline, the Welbeck to Evan Nielsen and just keep Semenyo anyway, I think is appealing. Do quite sort of like that. And I know that's a bit out there with the Liverpool first game, but like I said, they're going to get easier fixtures after then as well. And if Bournemouth do happen to score a couple of goals against Liverpool, I'm ahead of the curve. So overall, the strengths of this team are it's my team. I've selected it. I've tried to sort of until the last couple of days, I've not really watched other people's content because I'm trying to at least get my own team decisions there and have a solid team structure where, I'm happy with the team and then I could potentially tweak it. And I think that's important. Like FPL is a game, and of course we want to do well, but I think sometimes people make team selections out of fear of getting left behind. And there's a ton of good options this year, and it links to good price points as well. I've got sort of some good players that, I can find a bit of money from. If I had to sell a striker, I could sell a striker and downgrade to a 4.5 million striker. Everyone's going for Mark Gui from Sunderland, who's not going to play, and I think people's benches are looking a little bit thin at the moment. So I think the team is pretty solid. I like the price points. I can always swap a Marmoush to somebody. I could swap a Kudus to somebody cheaper, like an Anderson from Nottingham Forest and save a million there. And I do still have to bench people every week as well. The weaknesses are, we've talked about the strikers. So in the sense that there's some risky strikers there. Do we think that that is too much of a risk? I'd like to think that I've got strikers in there most weeks, one of them will score and get me a return. And I think that's kind of what I've gone for is just that consistency of ticking over with those points. And I talked in a previous video about how there's no Arsenal. I think that's fine for now. I think they don't have the easiest start to the season, so it's much easier just to sort of move to them later on after sort of game week 5 or 6. So that's the video. Hopefully, you're looking forward to the start of the season. Let me know if you've got any questions as well. If you've made it this far in the video, pop it in the comments because I will respond to every comment, positive or negative. It's great to have the engagement. And if you've got any sort of ideas for my team as well, pop those in as well. Go join the mini league and go check out all my other videos as well. Playlist will be on the screen right about now. Good luck in game week 1. This is the last video I'll be putting out before the start of the game week. So hopefully, you enjoy the weekend and football being back. And I will see you in the next one.